One of the best examples I can give you of innovation and evolution is the modern day SEAL teams. Now, if I polled the audience, what one event would most people associate the modern day SEAL teams with? Say it out loud. Bin Laden, right? I shot Bin Laden. If you haven't seen that YouTube video, go watch it immediately. It's pretty accurate towards the guy who actually shot him. I digress. The modern day SEAL teams, or the SEAL teams that in 2011 that were selected to go and execute that operation, have almost nothing to do, if not nothing to do, with the organization that became the modern day SEAL teams. So to continue on this journey, I got to tell you guys at least a little bit of a story about what SEALs actually are and where we came from, and it'll highlight the need and the necessity to continue to evolve. So, 1942 was the creation of the unit that became the SEAL teams, and they were called the Underwater Demolition Teams. Does anybody remember what was happening in 1942?
World War II.
Yes. What I like to call it is the deuce, because it sounds better than World War II. World War II was started because of what happened on December 7th, 1941, which was yesterday, was the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, for those of you who didn't realize that that happened. So in 1942, the Navy commissioned a unit called the Underwater Demolition Teams. Not because they were innovative and not because they were trying to evolve, but because of most thing that happens in the military, because of tragedy. So what kind of operations were we doing in the 40s? What kind of invasions?
Amphibious invasions.
Yes. Rudy, you know the answers, all right? God damn it. But if they're quiet for a few seconds, throw that stuff out there. We're going to work together here, okay? I'm happy you have your shirt on and not wearing a scarf, okay? Yeah. Amphibious invasions. Now let's be very clear. In the 40s, any battle that took place beyond what's called the high water line, so think of any beach, the tide goes up, the tide goes down. If you put a pin in the high water line, which is the point that the tide reaches, anything beyond that was the domain of the Army and the Marine Corps. The Navy personnel were not allowed beyond that point. So our job at that point, the Navy's job, was to get the Army and the Marines to the beachhead. The landing craft ramp comes down, and basically the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan was happening all over Europe. Problem being is that when you're driving a landing craft and you're getting shot at, I have a sneaking suspicion you have a really hard time understanding where exactly the beachhead is. And on more than one occasion, the landing craft doors would drop down, the Army or the Marine Corps soldiers would drive forward, and they would drown. Because it wasn't actually the beachhead, it was a coral reef. So the Navy's solution to that was to create a unit called the Underwater Demolition Teams. And these guys, their job, they would go and they would cover themselves in axle grease and a Jacques Cousteau dive mask, find somewhere to store their massive balls inside of their shorts, and they would swim with a lead line attached to a string, and they would measure the depths from about 1,000 yards from the shore all the way to the beach. They were looking for obstacles, they were marking obstacles, they would blow obstacles, and that was their job. They could not go past the high water line. Of course, born from tragedy. So from 1942 to 1962, that's what the UDT did. In 1962, specifically in January, President Kennedy commissioned SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2. I would say probably based off of guidance from military leaders, forward thinking, trying to figure out the demands of warfare in the future. 70% of the world is covered in water. It makes sense you would want a force that can come from the water, operate on land, and go back into the water. The creation of the SEAL teams, in essence, just basically took that pin out of the sand. We could then operate in the water, and we could go on to land. But it wasn't until probably the late 60s, early 70s, anybody know what was happening in that time period? Vietnam, right? Slightly different than a beachhead invasion. When I joined the military in 1996, and I knew I wanted to be a SEAL since I was 11, so I went and I found as much information as I could possibly find on the SEAL teams. Everything was about Vietnam. The traditional book was Men in Green Faces. And then there was a book called Rogue Warrior. Are you guys familiar with it? Marchenko, yes. I thought that was a nonfiction book because that's the category or the section that I found it in. I didn't realize until much later that it was actually misplaced. It was a fiction book, so I went in with a few skewed misconceptions about what I was getting into. My point is, be careful what you find on the internet. That's a weird way to get to that place. Not everything that you read is going to be true, especially if the book's titled American Sniper, but that's a different story. Vietnam is where the SEAL teams were really, that's where we became the force that most people would recognize. And when I came into the SEAL teams in the late 90s, we trained on tactics from Vietnam. We had gear from Vietnam. We had people who had served in Vietnam, few and far between. And those people, when they spoke, they were the burning bush. Because after Vietnam, there was a little bit of action in Grenada, a little bit of action in Panama, and the last time after Vietnam that any SEALs saw combat action was in Mogadishu. Black Hawk Down. You guys all heard of it? Movie? Okay. Anybody remember what year that was? 93. Rudy, you're correct again. It's all right. Now I don't even need to look because I can hear the sound of his voice. I know what it's going to be. It's fine. So, 1993. When I say SEALs saw action in Mogadishu, I mean 4 actual people from the SEAL teams saw action in Mogadishu. Panama and Grenada, probably less than 20 in each one of those environments. The point I'm trying to get to is we went from a place where they were very busy to a place where everything became hypothetical. And we spent a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, focusing on legacy tasks and training for the future based off of things that had only worked in the past. And then, the morning of September 11th, we got kicked right in the teeth. And I watched the second aircraft go in live from my apartment in San Diego. And I thought things were going to change overnight, and they didn't. It wasn't until 2003 that I actually I take it back. 2002, I first deployed over to Afghanistan, and then 2003 when I first rolled over into Iraq. And if I'm being completely honest about how things went for us as a unit, it sucked. It wasn't pretty. We were successful, but it was a pit bull fight the entire way there. We were an organization that didn't talk to each other. The teams are separated on East and West Coast. The even number teams are on the East Coast. The odd number teams are on the West Coast. 1, 3, and 5 at the time were separated by a fence, a chain link fence. I could see all the buildings, but I would not even talk to the people who were at a different team. Because absent an enemy, the SEAL teams will fight themselves. Or other services. We would talk shit about the Marines would talk shit about us, but it didn't really matter because there was no battlefield to figure out what was going on. When I got in, I was at Team 5. We were a cold weather team, focusing on mostly Asia. So we would go to Alaska and do cold weather training. Right down the street, a 9-iron shot away was SEAL Team 3. They did desert warfare. They got issued desert camouflage. I didn't even get a set of desert camouflage uniform until I went out to the East Coast. They wouldn't tell us how to operate in the desert, and I certainly wasn't going to tell them how to save their life in the cold. Still all SEALs, and then God help you if you were on the East Coast, because I wasn't even going to acknowledge your presence. You were a SEAL, but like you were down here, because the West Coast guys were up here. Because the East Coast guys hated us because they thought we always were walking around in flip-flops and playing volleyball, and they didn't realize we only did that on Fridays, right? So we did the whole time. They just have shitty weather, and they couldn't deal with it. So then 9/11 kicks us squarely in the teeth, and I end up overseas with East Coast guys, and we're wearing different uniforms with different call signs. We have largely the same equipment, but we're using it different ways, and it sucked. We were able to defeat our enemy, but for the first 24 months, we were basically pulling our head out of our ass at the same time that we were operating overseas. Fortunately, that environment doesn't exist anymore. I would say the military is very gray. I've had great relationships with Army, Air Force, Marine, all of it. The rivalries are gone because now it's real. There is no time for hypothetical. This is actually going to happen. We need to work together, and we need to figure out what works as a team. 2011, 10 years later, was Neptune Spear, where they found bin Laden. And the point of telling that whole story is that there's only 69 years between 1942 and 2011. And let's assume you make a 20-year career out of the military. That's 3.5 generations of going from covered in axle grease with a dive mask to landing helicopters in Pakistan and clearing buildings on the #1 target on the U.S. hit list. So why did they call us? Because we evolved and innovated based off of what the battlefield expected of us instead of trying to force the past into the future. We don't try to take our plan and force it onto the world. We take a plan, we throw it into the world, we adapt, we overcome, we make changes as we need to, because I don't care about the plan. I care about success. And that never-ending innovation and evolution, it continues. I got out in 2013. The teams that I came into are not the same teams that I got out of. The teams that I got out of, I guarantee you, are not the teams that are operating right now. Let's just call it 2018 because we're only a few weeks away. And that's going to continue. Not because the SEALs are guys wearing wire rim glasses sitting around in between playing Dungeons and Dragons going, what's the next greatest thing? It's because if we don't do that, people are going to die. In the military, a lot of the time you find yourself in a do or die moment. And again, to be honest, in the military, most of the time people have to die before there's a do. Every tactical shift that I saw in my career was based off of a catastrophe. People were running into rooms and then their heads started exploding. So we stopped running into rooms. We were landing helicopters close to targets. The helicopters started burning up in the sky and everybody on board of them was dying. So we started landing them far away. Did we have enough information to foresee those things coming? Probably. We honestly probably did. But you in this room have an advantage over what we had in the military because I was constrained and restrained by bureaucracy. Individuals don't have those restraints, so take advantage of that. If you can embrace innovation and evolution, in my opinion, you're putting yourself in the correct mindset for success.